Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone, and today our show is all about one of Hollywood's most beloved and iconic stars, Joel McCrea. In a career that spanned 50 years, he made more than 100 movies, including the great classics Foreign Correspondent, Sullivan's Travels, The Palm Beach Story, Barbary Coast, Buffalo Bill, and of course, Ride the High Country. Our guest is Wyatt McCrea, the grandson of Joel McCrea and his wife, actress Frances D. He has dedicated much of his life to preserving and honoring the legacy of his grandparents, both in their careers and their beautiful ranch. Wyatt, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here, Harvey. I couldn't think of a better place to be this afternoon. So I'm looking forward to our conversation.
You are Joel McCrea's eldest grandchild. You were 29 years old when he died in 1990, and your grandmother passed away at the age of 94 in 2004. So you really got to know your grandparents very well, didn't you?
Very well. As I was growing up, my dad ran a couple of ranches that my grandfather owned when I was a kid. So my grandparents were always around, whether it was holidays or school events or any of that sort of thing. They were always a part of our lives. And then when I got out of college, my grandfather asked me to come out here to the ranch and help him with some activities. And so I spent the last few years of his life with him on a daily basis. And then, of course, just stayed on and took care of my grandmother until she passed later on.
When did you first realize that your grandparents were more than just ranchers, that they were stars?
I guess I was a bit of a slow learner, Harvey. I don't know, but it wasn't until fourth grade I went in and my teacher said, "We really enjoyed seeing your grandfather on TV last night." And the wheels started turning. I thought, "What was he on TV for last night?" My dad had woken us up to watch the same movie, so I don't know why I was so confused. But anyway, that's when I realized that other people in the world knew him as an actor as well, and not just a rancher. Then I started to kind of put two and two together that he had a much bigger career on a national and international basis, not just my grandfather.
Well, let's start our discussion with your grandfather's career. He's one of the few classic stars who actually grew up in Hollywood at 7755 Hollywood Boulevard, if my memory serves me correctly.
You got it right on.
So Joel McCrea really grew up with the movie industry, didn't he?
He did, and people always ask me, why did he become an actor, or what prompted him to become an actor, and my response is, I don't think he had a choice but to become an actor. He went to school with C.B. DeMille's kids, and later on went to high school with all the actors of his day in that era. They were all growing up there, and one of his first childhood memories was riding his bicycle down and watching him film Intolerable, which was a huge D.W. Griffith film back in those days, and huge sets and everything. And where his house was at 7755 Hollywood Boulevard was the end of the street, end of Hollywood Boulevard in those days. So the studios would use the open expanse at the end of the road for filming, and he would go down there. And one of his first jobs was holding horses for William S. Hart and Tom Mix and people like that. And then he went on to have a paper route where C.B. DeMille was on his paper route, William S. Hart was on his paper route, people like that. And he just got to know a lot of the neighborhood kids, and they would invite him to dinners, and there would be producers or directors or other actors there. He met Charlie Chaplin at one of his friends' houses, and he just kind of grew up with the industry. And I tell people, I think it was just part of his life to become an actor. I mean, it was just part of the existence of his livelihood in those days.
Well, Joel McCrea worked with pretty much every major star and director in the golden age of Hollywood. I want to ask you first about the leading ladies, starting with Miriam Hopkins. He made
Right.
5 films with her. She had a horrible reputation for being difficult, rebellious. She threw tantrums. Did he ever talk about her?
He and Miriam actually got along great. He knew of her reputation, of course, being a co-star with her, I think he saw it a little bit firsthand with some other people, but not himself. She loved him and actually stood up for him a few times to get him some of the roles that he ended up with her as her co-star. But he was an easyggoing guy, and he was just able to get along with people, I think, and I think people that had that reputation, if they got that way with him, they felt guilty afterwards, because he was just such a nice guy. But he never really had any issues with her at all. And he always said she was very professional, and he really enjoyed working with her, to be honest with you. Whereas a lot of people did not. No, you're exactly right. A lot of people didn't get along too well with her.
The other leading lady that Joel McCrea is constantly associated with is Barbara Stanwyck. They made 6 movies together. What did he think of her?
He loved Barbara. And he always said that, there was no interest off screen. I mean, they were great friends, but there was never any romantic feelings or anything like that. But on screen, the chemistry they had together was fantastic. I mean, they were able to play off of each other as if they'd known each other their whole lives. Their pairings, some of those films, especially like Union Pacific, and some of those are some of the best films they both did together, I think. Interesting story about Barbara. The first time he worked with her, he was loaned out from another studio, and they were on the set, and they were taking still pictures of the cast, the in-house cast at the studio where the picture was being made. And so, because he had been loaned out from another studio, he thought he was not part of that group. So it was getting close to lunch, and he thought, well, they're not going to get to me. So he decided to go to lunch. Well, they called for him while he was at lunch. And when he came back, Stanwyck was right in his face. And she said, if you want to make it in this business, you be here, you be on time, and you know your lines. And if you know a little bit about Stanwyck, she could use some more colorful language than that, which she did. And my grandfather said it was the best lesson he ever learned. And he said she was exactly right. He shouldn't have gone to lunch. He should have waited until they told him it was okay to go to lunch, but he didn't, and he paid for it. But from that moment on, he said she was always in his corner, and later on, he was in her corner. He helped her get the role for Stella Dallas later on in her career. But he said she was probably the most professional actress he ever worked with. There's no question about that. They stayed friends forever.
She was a pro, all right. Your grandfather starred in Foreign Correspondent, and there's a rumor that he could actually imitate Alfred Hitchcock. Is that true?
He could, yeah. Even late in life, whenever he talked about Foreign Correspondent, he'd do a great little impression of Hitchcock sitting in his director's chair, And Hitchcock was a semi-frequent guest here at the ranch, or visitor to the ranch, because he loved the butter that we churned out here. My grandfather had a couple of milk cows, and there was fresh butter and fresh cream, and you could kind of tell from Hitchcock's figure he liked food, he liked to eat. So, and he would come out, and my grandfather would give him fresh butter and cream, and he loved that. He just loved coming out here and breathing the fresh air. But he was a character, from all my grandfather said.
Joel McCrea made 2 movies with the brilliant Preston Sturges, Sullivan's Travels and The Palm Beach Story. He was a very good comic actor. I know he loved Westerns, but did he like doing comedies?
He loved doing comedies, and he actually made another one with Preston called The Great Moment. They actually made 3 together, and The Great Moment was not a box office success like the other 2 were, and was a little darker. But I always tell people I think my grandfather had a great sense of humor, and loved to practical joke, and loved to tease, and loved to laugh. He had a big barrel laugh, and I think had he not gotten into Westerns, if ranching and horses and that side of things had not been such a big part of his life, he would have stuck with comedy, I think, because he really loved doing comedy. His heart was in anything that was funny. There's no question about that. The Westerns that came later on were kind of a natural extension of his life here at the ranch, and so they came very easily for him. But I think, like I said, if that had not been a part of it, comedy would have been probably his mainstay, I think.
Your grandparents were well known for not being part of the Hollywood social scene. They didn't care about being big stars. Their life was the ranch and their children. But did they have close friends in the business who would come and visit them at the ranch?
They did. And I think there are times when my grandmother probably would have liked to have participated a little bit more in some of the social activities that went on. But my grandfather, once you got him out here to the ranch, it was like pulling teeth to get him to leave. He didn't like to go in. And I think, having grown up in Hollywood and been around some of that as a child, and seen some of some of the big parties that went on, he felt like he'd been there, done that. There was not a lot of interest in the big social activity, and they always felt like the ranch is really what kept them grounded. They didn't get caught up into the Hollywood rumor circles and all that went on in those days. But well, it still goes on today, actually. But they loved, especially after the boys came along. My dad and Jody, the two oldest, when they came along, they really felt the need to keep the boys from that atmosphere, and the ranch was a great vehicle for that. But Gary Cooper was probably my grandfather's best industry friend, best Hollywood friend, and he was a frequent visitor to the ranch. There's no question about that. But over the years, I mean, Stanwyck came out, Maurice Chevalier came out, Hitchcock came out. I mean, they had they didn't throw parties. It was more ones and twos that would come out at a time, but and just maybe for the weekend or whatever. But Gary Cooper, who was he loved the outdoors and was an outdoorsman and loved to hunt and that sort of thing. And in those days, this ranch was very remote. Of course, population has kind of crept up around us now, but in those days it was very remote, and Cooper loved to come out and hunt and shoot and just hike around, do whatever he wanted to do, because it was close enough. It was an hour and a half drive for him, and of course he and my grandfather were kind of two peas in a pod as far as that went. They were both just loved the outdoors. There were many frequent visitors over the course of time.
In 1946, after making The Virginian, your grandfather decided he only wanted to make Westerns. Why?
Well, I think, and he always said that, when he put on a pair of boots and a hat and stepped onto the back of a horse, he just felt more comfortable. And for him, doing Westerns was kind of an easy transition for him, and one that he felt comfortable with. And one that I think he didn't have to stretch himself too far inside. It just came naturally to him, those parts, and so it was easy for him. And they were turning out Westerns like crazy there during the 50s and 60s and in the 40s even, and it was an easy extension for him to just make that transition to Westerns. He was becoming more involved with the ranch at that point. And I think it was just, like I said, he just didn't have to work as hard at Westerns as he did some of the other parts. And that may sound bad, but it was a great move for him. There's no question about it. I mean, and most people remember him as a Western actor. They forget about the first half of his career, which was actually some of his best acting.
Well, looking back at those Westerns that he made, I'm thinking of Wichita, where he played Wyatt Earp, and Buffalo Bill, and Ramrod, and Ride the High Country. Do you think that because your grandfather was a real rancher, and everybody in Hollywood knew it, do you think that he was underrated and underappreciated as an actor because Hollywood saw him as just playing himself all the time? I mean, shouldn't he have won an Oscar or a Golden Globe for at least one of those roles?
Oh, in my mind, there's no question about it, Harvey. I mean, I think there are several roles he should have been nominated for. The more the merrier. Sullivan's Travels, some of those earlier films, and even some of the westerns. I thought Ride the High Country was just a fantastic role for him. There's no question that he was underrated. I think he just kind of flew under the radar. And he always said that he wasn't out there knocking on their door like a lot of actors were, and because of that, I think people tended to just forget about him a little bit, but having that attention was never important to him. I mean, acting, he used to joke, it was a joke, but he joked that he only acted so he could afford to ranch because that's what he really loved to do. But he loved to act as well. I mean, there's no question about it. I mean, he, as a young man coming up, like we talked earlier, coming up in Hollywood, growing up in Hollywood, he loved the industry and he knew what it was all about. But he was comfortable enough in his own skin that he didn't need, awards and recognition to feel like he had done a good job, even though I fully agree, like I stated just a minute ago, that it was very underrated and should have been nominated. I mean, several of those films were nominated for various features in the film, whether it was sound or best film or best cinematography or whatever it was, and several of his co-stars were nominated and actually won over the years and for films they did together. And so there's no question. I think he should have been rewarded more than he was.
Your grandfather was very good friends with Will Rogers, who was like a second father to him. Is it true that Will Rogers helped Joel McCrea get financing to buy the ranch in 1933?
It is true. Yeah, Will asked him, "What are you going to do with the money you're making in Hollywood?" And my grandfather said, "Well, I hope to buy a ranch someday." And Will said, "Well, don't wait for someday." He said, "If you do, you'll end up like all these other actors, and you'll buy a big convertible, and you'll cruise up and down Hollywood Boulevard, winking at the girls, and you'll have nothing left in the end." He said. So my grandfather, when he found this ranch, and he had kind of been looking around on the outskirts of Los Angeles, but he found this place and fell in love with it, and just outside of Thousand Oaks here in Ventura County, and he went and told Will about it, but he said, "I don't have the down payment put together for it yet." And as he told me, Will Rogers handed him his business card and wrote the name of his banker on the back of it and said, "Go talk to this gentleman." And my grandfather went and talked to him, and he had the loan for the ranch the next day, just based on Will Rogers' business cards. So that's the way things were done in those days, you know. But
Very unique. And another really unique thing about your grandparents is that they were happily married for 57 years, which is almost unheard of for two Hollywood stars. In fact, he died on their 57th wedding anniversary. He was known for being really a strong family man, wasn't he?
he was, yeah, and I mean, any marriage that lasts that long has its ups and downs, like we all know. But they were able to work through it and made it work for 57 years, and like you said, it was just unheard of in those days, especially to have stars of that caliber, stay in a relationship for that long was very, very unusual. There's no question about it. But they were family people, and they both understood the importance of having family and being close to family, and the importance of that, and the importance of sticking together. I think my grandfather always called my grandmother a sticker outer, because anytime things got tough, she'd stick it out and she'd make it work. And they had a great deal of respect for one another as well. And I think that helped. I mean, they didn't, neither one looked down on the other. They looked at themselves as equal partners,
Well,
and I think that made it work. But
when you look at how many children of Hollywood stars had such difficult and unstable lives because of their parents' immaturity, do you think your father and your uncles appreciated how lucky they were to have parents like Joel McCrea and Frances D?
Oh, there's no question about it, and especially I know probably my dad more than any of them, but because he was a great family man as well, and really followed in my grandfather's footsteps in that regard, and my grandmother as well. But they all appreciated it, and there again, it was the ranch that helped hold the family together and kept them grounded. They didn't have a lot of that outside distraction that people growing up in Hollywood have, and the parents that are throwing those huge Hollywood parties and having people over, and all that goes along with that. I mean, they avoided those vices and those distractions, and there's no question that the boys were very appreciative of the way they grew up. I don't think there was a better way to grow up. There's no question about that. Yeah.
I want to move on now to your grandmother, Frances D. She was a very accomplished Hollywood actress and starred in Little Women with Katharine Hepburn, The Gay Deception with Francis Lederer. She
Right.
made two movies with Bette Davis, Of Human Bondage and Payment on
Right.
Demand. She always struck me as a consummate actress who worked very hard at her craft. Very different approach to acting than your grandfather.
Yeah, no question about it, Harvey. I mean, my like I said earlier, my grandfather always just kind of let it come to him. My grandmother was very, very proactive in wanting to be a better actress, and worked very hard at it and studied her lines. I mean, she messed around a little bit with method acting, which was kind of coming into vogue during a certain period there. She decided that wasn't her cup of tea, but anyway, she worked very hard she wanted to be a great actress, and she always said, somebody asked her one time, "When did you know where you wanted to be an actress?" And she said, "Don't all little girls want to be actresses?" So she had that in the back of her mind from the time she was a young girl. But I often wonder. Gypsy Colt was the last movie she made in the mid-50s, and she scaled back her career actually back in the 30s to about a movie a year, so she could spend more time with the kids and raise the kids and be a part of their lives, she made the right choice. There's no question about that. But I always know in the back of her mind, she wondered just how far she could have gone, because I'll stack her up against any of the greats of her day. I think she was as good of actress as any of them. I mean, she was the consummate professional, as you said. There's no question about it.
How many movies did your grandparents make together? I remember Wells Fargo and Four Faces West.
Yeah, they made 4 together, 2 before they were married and 2 after. The Silver Cord, which is the first one they made together, and that was actually the one where they kind of got introduced to each other and got to know each other a little bit. And then One Man's Journey was made right before, well, earlier in the year before they were married. Earlier in 1933, it was released, and that's where they really began dating and spending a lot of time together. And then afterwards, they made Wells Fargo and Four Faces West. And I love Wells Fargo. Four Faces West to me is probably the best pairing of the two. They're just you can tell that they really know each other in that film. I mean, they play off of each other very, very well. And the look in their eyes, I mean, it's interesting because for me, I know that look. I've seen that look in real life, when they're looking at each other with that love in their eyes. And you see it on screen, and it's, for a typical viewer, it probably looks like great acting, but it was real life for them, when they were looking at each other or may embrace or kiss each other in a scene. It was for real.
Was Frances D surprised that her movie I Walked with a Zombie became a cult classic?
She used to laugh about that. She could not believe that people would still have any interest in that film. She didn't have any interest in it when she made it, she said, but it did. I mean, it's a cult classic. People still watch that. We do a movie night here at the ranch once in a while, and I show that on Halloween once in a while just because it's a great movie for Halloween. But she just couldn't understand what people saw in it. But when you watch it, I can see why people especially that love the horror genre or the mystique of a film like that, you can see why people are drawn into it and why it works.
Well, before we move on to talk about the ranch and the foundation, I want to mention your uncle, Jody McCrae. He was an actor
Right.
who made Wichita Town with your grandfather, but he's best known for all those beach party movies where he played Dead Ed opposite Annette Funicello and Frankie Avalon. Do you think it was hard for him to carve out a career for himself in Hollywood under the shadow of his famous father?
It really was, Harvey. He and you mentioned the beach movies. He loved the beach movies. He had a great time making them, and he said they saved his career at the time, but they also hurt him later on because he got typecast in that kind of big goofy character kind of role. But it was very difficult for him. People always compared him to my grandfather, and those are big shoes to fill. I mean. My grandfather was always considered one of the great actors of his generation, and to come along after that and try and be a part, follow up on those footsteps was very difficult for Jody. And my grandfather tried to help him quite a bit. I mean, one of the reasons my grandfather agreed to do Wichita Town is because Jody was kind of the co-star there, the deputy, and Jody was a fine actor. I mean, in my opinion, I've seen in some things outside of the beach movies that he was good in, and I think it depended on who was directing and that sort of thing. But there's a great movie, Young Guns of Texas, which has a lot of kids of stars in it, and that's a fun movie to watch for people if you can find it. It's kind of hard to find, but it's a great movie, and Jody does a good job in that. But it was tough for him. It really was, and eventually he ended up becoming a rancher and moving down to New Mexico, which is where he ended up passing on. He loved it. He loved acting, and he loved the time he spent with it. But and I think he always wanted to keep doing it, but at some point he realized that it just probably wasn't going to be a realistic path for him to follow.
Okay, now Wyatt, I want to ask you about the ranch and the Joel and Frances McCrea Ranch Foundation. The ranch is in the
Sure.
Santa Rosa Valley in Ventura, California. Can you tell us why in 2011 you started the foundation?
Yes, I started the foundation, Harvey. We what was left of the ranch, and of course over the course of time, my grandfather had kind of pared the ranch down. He had sold some acreage that became part of the city of Thousand Oaks, was developed at some point there. And the Santa Rosa Valley is a little valley that kind of runs between Thousand Oaks and Camarillo, and in the central part of Ventura County, but south central. But I started the foundation mainly to preserve the buildings that were here, to rehab and restore. That's the main function of the foundation, is a fundraising arm to restore and rehab and rehabilitate the buildings that are here. We have an infrastructure that dates back to 1890. The oldest building on the ranch was built in 1890. And it's really, this ranch has remained fairly much untouched as far as the buildings and the main portion of the ranch. And we really wanted to see the buildings, stay the way they were and not be torn down. And of course, the main house, we really didn't want to see anything happen to that. And at one point there, we were getting some pressure to, do something, develop, or whatever it may be. And we just felt the right thing to do was to preserve the buildings that are here. Subsequently, I've had the ranch with the help of some historians. We've had the ranch placed on the National Register of Historical Places, which offers it some federal protection, which is nice to have. But that's the main goal of the foundation. And the secondary goal of the foundation is to continue to develop programming so people can enjoy the ranch. Right now we're only open when we have a scheduled event or a program, which we do tours, and then we do movies about once a month. In a normal year, this last year has been a little difficult to do anything, but in a normal year we give tours and show movies and share a little bit of history, not only of my grandparents' movie making history, but also of the California ranch lifestyle that was very prevalent back in from the turn of the century up into the 60s, when development kind of started to take over here in Southern California. But like I mentioned, this ranch is pretty much the way it was all through that era, through the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and it's a way for kids to kind of learn a little bit about what this area used to be like, and what farming was like, and ranching cattle was like. And, there's very few city kids that are exposed to that these days. We kind of get further and further away from those agrarian roots, I guess. And so it was one of our goals to be able to share that. And that's why I started the foundations.
Well, I love that your family was able to preserve this land that would otherwise have been developed into condos and shopping malls. Your grandparents would be so happy about that.
Well, I think they would. They spent so much time over the course of their lives building it up, and my grandfather building the house, and just the whole story of him finding the ranch and being able to fulfill his dream of becoming a rancher. It just seemed like a shame to let a bulldozer take it all down. There was just too much background here to let that happen. And of course, there's always trade-offs, and a few of the outer lying parcels of the ranch we sold in order to do what we wanted to do with the main part of the ranch. But I'm just really thrilled that we were able to preserve it, and that now it has federal protection, and we have a great partner in the Conejo Recreation and Park District, which is our local park district here, and they help me in handling our events and all of that sort of thing, and it's been a great partnership for us. There's no doubt about it, and I'm just happy to know that it will be here for future generations to see, because it's I think it's important for people to know where they came from and the history of an area.
The website for the foundation is McCreaRanchFoundation.org, and I urge everyone to take a look at that website and see everything that's going on to preserve this important part of California's history. Wyatt, when I come to California to film some shows there, could I get you to give me a tour of the ranch?
Hey, anytime, Harvey, you're always welcome. You can even stay. We'll find a room for you in the barn somewhere. So anyway, but you're always welcome, Harvey. No, I would love to give you a tour, and I would love to give you a private behind the scenes tour one of these days, and just show you what it's all about. So and I hope you make it out here. Seriously, I would love to show you the place.
I'm taking you up on that offer.
That's good. That's good. I hope you do, Harvey. Definitely. I'll be here.
Wyatt, when I look at your grandfather's life, it strikes me that he really had the best of both worlds. He was a successful movie star, And he was a successful rancher. Destiny was kind to him. He was always in the right place at the right time. Do you think he really got that his life was very special?
To a certain degree, I think he did, Harvey. But you hit the nail on the head. He was always in the right place at the right time. He just had a knack for not forcing things, just letting things come to him. And I think he realized, late in life that he had opportunities that most people don't get, and I think he realized that he had a special. I don't think he looked at himself as being anything special, but I think he looked at his life as being able to have had an opportunity to do a lot of things that people don't get the opportunity to do. And he was very grateful for that. There's no question about it. And I think he felt like he was guided by whatever spiritual force you want to believe in. But I think he felt like he was just, led to do the right thing and to be in the right place at the right time. And he just, he grew up knowing the right people. I think, he just was a part of it. And like I said, he never really forced anything. And it just always seemed to, get dropped at his feet for whatever reason. But I think he realized that. I think he really appreciated the life that he had and was grateful for it.
Was he a spiritual man?
He was, yeah, he was, and that came from his mother and his father. They were both spiritual people, and he, was believed in a higher power, and always felt like there was some divine intervention that took place from time to time that helped him throughout his lifetime. There's no question about that. And my grandmother, the same. She felt the same way. So,
And you live at the ranch, don't you?
My wife and I are the last holdouts, so we're still here, Harvey. Trying to hold down the fort.
You must feel a real sense of purpose about your life, that you've really dedicated so much energy to preserving your grandparents' legacy, their memory, the ranch. It's really an amazing journey you've been on yourself.
Well, I appreciate that, Harvey. It became very important to me after my grandfather passed away, and as my grandmother progressed in her life, I just felt like, the more I heard from outside people how much their films or their interaction with them over the years, how much it had meant to them, to people that would tell me this, it just became a kind of a quest for me to make sure that their spirits stayed alive and that because they meant so much to so many different people in the community. They supported a lot of local organizations and everything, and I just felt it was important to keep their spirits alive and to keep it going as long as I could. And they were a big influence on me personally in my life and helped me a tremendous amount. So I just felt like it was the least I could do to give back to them. It was to try and keep the spirit alive.
Well, Wyatt, I want to thank you so much for coming on our show and talking about your wonderful grandparents. I've really enjoyed this visit with you, and I can't wait to come and see you at the ranch.
Well, it's been wonderful for me, Harvey. I appreciate your questions and appreciate all you're doing to try and keep the classic films alive and keep the memory of these folks going. And any chance I get to talk about my grandparents, I'm thrilled to do it because they meant so much to so many people and made so many great films. It's worth talking about.
Well, thank you again. Our guest has been Wyatt McCrea, grandson of beloved actors Joel McCrae and Frances D. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thanks to our producer, Steve Silver. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time.
Remember to subscribe to the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. And be sure to check out more great interviews with Harvey Brownstone on harveybrownstoneInterviews.com.